For the first 4 decades after its inception, the Baha'i Faith was promulgated from the places where its founder and his family were exiled, to Baghdad, to Adrianople, and then finally to the prison city of Akka in northern Israel. But after being released early in the 20th century, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, Abdul-Baha, made a historic journey that would spread the faith of his father throughout the world. 100 years in the West, today on the Light of Unity. Welcome to the Light of Unity. I'm Nwandi Lawson. At the time of his passing, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, appointed his eldest son, Abdul-Baha, not only to lead the young Baha'i community, but also as the center of the covenant and the example to which all the Baha'is could turn. This is the story of Abdul-Baha's travels to Europe and North America. The eldest son of the Prophet, founder of the Baha'i Faith, had spent the greater part of his life imprisoned by the Ottoman Empire, along with his father Baha'u'llah. After the Young Turk Revolution ended the Ottoman Empire, Abdul-Baha boldly took the Baha'i teachings on racial and gender equality, the complementary role of science and religion, and the unity of the world's religions to Europe and North America. Between August and December 1911, he visited London, Bristol, and Paris, telling a group in France, "We all, the Eastern with the Western nations, must strive day and night with heart and soul to achieve this high ideal, to cement the unity between all the nations of the earth." On March 25, 1912, Abdul-Baha boarded the SS Cedric from Egypt to the U.S. The American Baha'is had sent thousands of dollars so that he might travel on the more luxurious Titanic. Abdul-Baha refused, returning the money for charity. He arrived in the harbor of New York on April 11, 1912.
As the new century begins, optimism is contagious and confidence widespread. Day by day, the face of the nation is changing as Irish, Germans, and Italians pass through Ellis Island. The age of flight has arrived as the Wright brothers soar above the dunes of Kitty Hawk in their Whopper flying machine. Automobiling, the new fad, is quickly becoming the pastime of the wealthy and a danger to livestock and pedestrians.
In Chicago, there was a community of more than 700 Baha'is. In the spirit of the times, Baha'i men and women often conducted business separately. Thornton Chase, the first Baha'i in America, served on the House of Spirituality, while Corinne True served on the Women's Assembly of Teaching. Foremost on their minds was having a meeting place for their expanding community and the desire to establish a visible Baha'i presence in Chicago. They were determined to erect a temple for the Baha'i faith. So in March of 1903, they wrote to Abdul-Baha in Akka, Israel, seeking permission. As the leader of the Baha'i faith at that time, Abdul-Baha was consulted in all matters, large and small. Little did they know that Abdul-Baha would use this effort to actualize the Baha'i principles of gender equality and unity of purpose among rich and poor alike. 6 weeks later, the House of Spirituality received Abdul-Baha's first response on the subject of building the temple. With great excitement, Thornton Chase shared the letter with the House of Spirituality.
Gentlemen, our beloved Abdul-Baha has replied to our request. Exert your energy in accomplishing what ye have undertaken, so that this glorious temple may be built.
Surprisingly, 8 days later, a second tablet arrived at the home of Mrs. Corinne True. As president of the Women's Assembly of Teaching, Corinne immediately shared the letter with the other women.
He says, "Now the day has arrived in which the edifice of God shall be erected in America. Whosoever arises for the service of this building shall be assisted with a great power from his supreme kingdom."
At the time, Corinne True had no idea the extent to which her responsibility would grow in promoting the temple project. In time, she would be known by Baha'is across America as the Mother of the Temple. In 1907, both Thornton Chase and Corinne True received permission to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. During his trip, Thornton was especially anxious to speak with Abdu'l-Baha about the temple project. Despite his close friendship with Corinne, Thornton was frustrated with her interference in business affairs best left to men. He was shocked when, in response to his questions about building the temple, Abdu'l-Baha replied, "When you return to America, consult with Mrs. True. I have given her complete instruction." In one fell swoop, Abdu'l-Baha reversed the tenor of the times and raised the station of women by assigning Corinne True the leadership role in the project.
The master said it should be near the lake and away from the center of business.
What will the temple look like?
On that, Abdu'l-Baha was very specific. It should have 9 sides, with 9 avenues radiating from it, each with a pool in the center.
In 1908, the first 2 parcels of the Sheridan Road property were purchased for $2,000. By this time, men and women were working side by side, but the Chicago Baha'is were becoming overwhelmed. They realized it was time to reach out and make this a national project. Corinne invited Baha'is from coast to coast to her home to discuss the project. Here, the Temple Unity Group was formed and an architects committee appointed.
My dear Helen, I feel like mounting the housetops and shouting to the people to arise for the temple.
After being elected financial secretary of Temple Unity, Corinne's enthusiasm could not be stilled. She wrote over 10 unique letters per day to Baha'is across the United States, educating them about the house of worship and quoting Abdu'l-Baha and calling it the Mashriq al-Askar, the dawning place of the mention of God.
The great purpose of the Baha'i movement is to restore the foundation of human solidarity. Stop and meditate, friends, upon the necessary part a Mashriq al-Askar will play in the future development of the world. Will it not become a visiting point for all nations and people throughout the centuries and cycles?
More than a decade later, an architect's design was selected that embodied this vision of the Mashriq al-Askar. The architect was 64-year-old French-Canadian LOU121911. His plan would cost an estimated $1.5 million to build. On May 1st, 1912, Abdu'l-Baha visited the house of worship site in Wilmette. He laid the cornerstone of the building with his own two hands, a stone carried from a construction site in Chicago by the aging seamstress Nettie Tobin, who could not afford to make a contribution of money. As he placed the stone in its spot, he proclaimed, "The temple is already built."
Having laid the cornerstone for the North American Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois on May 1st, 1912, Abdu'l-Baha continued on to several Midwestern cities before returning to New York City, visiting Boston, and on July 24th, 1912, arriving in Dublin, New Hampshire.
The historic village of Dublin lies as a gem amid the hills of New Hampshire, which have recently been shining with particular luster because of the presence of Abdu'l-Baha, the servant of God. This was the description given by Joseph H. Hannon upon the arrival of Abdu'l-Baha in Dublin on July 25, 1912. He spent more consecutive days in this community than any other location while visiting the United States. In the summer of 2005, the Dublin Inn was offered as a gift to the American Baha'i community. The National Spiritual Assembly accepted this gift to be used as a place of visitation and meetings. The event included Baha'is from around New England, as well as special guests from Dublin, including selectmen, local historians, and archivists.
We are overjoyed that you have taken it over and that it will be kept properly as a shrine, but also as a historic building. I think the joy in the town hall is tempered by the fact that it's just been taken off the tax roll.
The gathering brought people together to talk about the many individuals who made sacrifices over the years and to share stories of Abdu'l-Baha's visit to the region. In 1912, Dublin was a long train or carriage ride from Boston. It was a community where the wealthy came in the summer to vacation and attracted leaders of thought and established members of the arts. The elite in society at that time came to breathe the clear air of the mountains and engage in lectures on philosophy, politics, and spirituality. It was into this atmosphere that Abdu'l-Baha arrived in Dublin. Howard Colby Ives, a Unitarian minister, later to become a Baha'i, in a statement about Abdu'l-Baha said,
"His life had become a constant submission to every form of hardship and depression. When considered from the material standpoint alone, dungeons and chains had been his lot, torture not seldom, confinement in stocks or any indignity which his heartless jailers might design. How can it be explained that in this environment he not only mingled with these products of wealth and culture with no sign of embarrassment to them or to him, but he literally outshone them in their chosen fields?"
He met with Baha'is and dignitaries who traveled from all corners of the country. He offered talks on subjects ranging from the immortality of the soul, theology, gender equality, industrial justice, poverty, and the coming together of people from the East and West. One Sunday, he was asked to speak at the local Unitarian church. He spoke for 50 minutes on spiritual education. Howard Colby Ives wrote of that day,
What his subject was I do not recall, nor does a single word of his address remain with me. My memory is all of the quiet New England church, the crowded pews, and Abdu'l-Baha on the platform. His cream-colored robe, his white hair and beard, his radiant smile and courteous demeanor. And his voice, like a resonant bell of the finest timbre, never loud, but of such a penetrating quality that the walls of the room seemed to vibrate with its music.
The date of his talk has been marked each year for nearly 20 years by the church parishioners, retelling his visit.
Kings come here, they would have been served, but this fervor and zeal of the friends would not have appeared for any one of them.
On this Sunday, Erica Toussaint, the great-granddaughter of Mr. Ives, spoke to those gathered.
Just read, where it says, I recall that as I left the church and joined some of the New York friends who were among the audience, I said to one of them, at last I know, never again will I doubt or question.
Among the many stories of Abdu'l-Baha's extraordinary example while visiting this country was his demonstration of racial equality. Even in this atmosphere of the elite, he set the standard. One of these stories was the occasion of his meeting with members of the exclusive Dublin Lake Club, where he spoke about spirituality and the advancement of this new cycle. Later that day, he held a private meeting at Agnes Parsons' boathouse on Dublin Lake. His guests were 28 African Americans who served at the club. He spoke about the essential unity of all races and the goals of this new revelation from God. He used this occasion to announce the upcoming marriage between Louis Gregory, an African American man, and Louisa Matthews, an Englishwoman. This was a marriage blessed by Abdu'l-Baha. After his death, Louis Gregory would be named the first African American to attain to the station of Hand of the Cause of God. One of Abdu'l-Baha's secretaries said that this meeting of the races was little less than a miracle. In fact, the splitting of the moon into two pieces seemed an easier accomplishment in the eyes of the Americans.
Although Abdu'l-Baha had laid the cornerstone for the Baha'i house of worship, finishing the work of the temple would be fraught with challenges and not be completed until after his death.
Still reeling from the stock market crash of '29, the outlook is grim. 25% of our labor force is out of work. Droughts, plagues, and dust storms are sweeping across the Midwest, wiping out crops and sending our farmers in search of work.
The unusually mild winter weather in Chicago of 1930 and 31 allowed the project to move forward smoothly, and with sacrificial contributions flowing in steadily from Baha'is, building was significantly ahead of schedule. Then, disaster struck. During the early morning hours of January 15, 1931, fire brought the temple project to a grinding halt. The fire began when tarps covering freshly poured concrete were ignited by small stoves intended to keep the concrete from freezing. Within a few minutes, the entire upper portion of the temple was a blazing inferno, fed by wooden scaffolding. The Chicago Tribune reported that thousands of people gathered to watch firemen battle the flames. The Baha'i world reeled under the shock as cablegrams carried the news across the nation and beyond to distant lands. While the damage was extensive, this proved to be only a temporary setback. By March, all fire damage had been repaired and construction was back on track. By May of 1931, the superstructure of the temple was completed.
Sympathy marches are held throughout the nation. Thousands of both whites and Negroes demonstrate from coast to coast.
America is moving. War veterans and their families are streaming out of the busyness of the cities to the serenity of the suburbs. Meanwhile, the great migration of African Americans from the south to the north is at its height. 3 out of 4 Americans say they are middle class, and prosperity is just around the corner. Under the seemingly placid comfort of American life, the struggle for equal rights is gaining momentum.
The first week of May 1953, Baha'is from across North America and many international friends gathered in Chicago for an 8-day jubilee. By this time, the leader of the Baha'i faith was Shoghi Effendi, the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha, who had been appointed guardian of the faith in Abdu'l-Baha's will. From Haifa, Israel, he continued his grandfather's work in guiding the growth of the Baha'i faith.
The following recording presents but a few of the highlights from the 45th Annual Baha'i Convention and from the American Intercontinental Teaching Conference. 8 days of joy and wonder, every moment of which was precious. And a dozen such recordings as this one could be made, because every moment was an outstanding moment. However, in order that those who were unable to be present for this historic occasion might share some of the inspiration and happiness of those hours, the following is offered.
Friends, our very great moment has arrived. The maidservant of Baha'u'llah, the handmaiden of Baha'u'llah, Ruhiya Khanum, the representative of our beloved guardian, has arrived. Ruhiya Khanum.
Ruhiya Khanum, may I introduce these representatives of the press, please? This is the lady on your right is Mrs. Coleman, Associated Negro Press, and this is Mr. Astley Cock, the religious editor of the Chicago Tribune.
Very happy to meet you. What particular message are you bringing to Chicago at this time, to your fellow Baha'i?
I am bringing from him direct a message of dedication for our house of worship, out at Wilmette, which is now being opened to the public for the first time, 50 years after its inception.
At the temple site, Gone were the workmen, scaffolding and concrete forms, the ladders, the hammers, and the other tools that had given birth to a brilliant architectural gem. On May 2nd, 1953, the fourth day of the Jubilee, Corinne True arrived at the house of worship and moved silently through the crowds. Years later, her daughter recalled that occasion saying about her mother, "As she approached the temple, everyone stopped her wanting to speak to her, but she couldn't. She did not weep, but she could not speak. She could hardly raise her head. It was a tremendously moving moment. It was like carrying a load for a very long time, and then suddenly the load was lifted. At that moment, it was reality." For the first time, thousands of people from all races and of many nationalities entered through this holy temple's 9 doors.
And it all began with the historic visit of Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha next went on to champion peace, women's rights, racial equality, and social justice in California before leaving the U.S., bound for Montreal, Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Addressing a group in Paris in 1911, Abdu'l-Baha said, "Sometimes the sun rises from the center of the horizon. Then in summer, it rises farther north. In winter, farther south. But it is always the same sun, however different are the points of its rising." So if you'd like to learn more about the current spiritual springtime that's shared by the Baha'i Faith, please phone 1-800-22-UNITE or go online to baha'i.us. I'm Nwandi Lawson, leaving you with the words of Baha'u'llah. "So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth." See you next time for another edition of the Light of Unity.